All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the brain injury discussion. This is your host, Jay. Today, we are going to talk about other kinds of encephalopathy and brain injury, with a focus this episode on some obscure, maybe some lesser known types of encephalopathy. I think it's important that we at least know that encephalopathy exists, but I found a few interesting ones I would like to share with you guys. If you have an interesting disease process you want me to cover, I'd love to hear that in the comments section. Also, feel free to like and subscribe. We are grateful for the people who like and subscribe, and we always appreciate your feedback. But with that being said, we have a few different types of encephalopathy to get into, so let's get started. First, let's talk about what's called hepatic encephalopathy. And you might be wondering, Jay, what is hepatic? Well, hep is pertinent to the liver. So the liver writ large. And again, we see here that the liver is full of these different ducts that, a lot of this kind of piles into filtering of the blood. And so it's not just important for me to know brain anatomy. I also need to know the rest of the anatomy because it ties into the brain. Because if someone who were to become my client has a diagnosis of hepatic encephalopathy, I need to at least be able to understand what it's saying. Because according to the definition, again, sources in the description below, it is a range of neuropsychiatric abnormalities from the accumulation of neurotoxic substances in the bloodstream due to liver dysfunction. All right, the hepatic organ is the liver. And so if the liver is not functioning, you might see a range of cognitive and motor deficits. Again, if there is toxicity in the bloodstream, you can expect the brain to not work properly. We see this in septic encephalopathy as well. But this can happen with the liver as well. And like the brain, you only have one of these things in your body. And so that's why it's important to consider, okay, am I doing the good things to take care of my brain? Am I also taking care of my liver? These things have a range of causes. Again, there's stuff like NASH, which is non-alcoholic, liver failure, basically. But it all stems from liver failure, which is one of the main filtrations for blood and chemicals in the body. Um, we also see that this is due to a rise of ammonia levels, which leads to this thing called jaundice, where the skin of the body will turn this kind of ill yellowish. And jaundice is usually one of the later signs, and it's not a good sign either. So, um, with this, all I can say is protect your liver and your brain. Um, don't try to damage your liver if you can do so. So keep that in mind. These kinds of encephalopathies exist. But anyways, let's continue and let's talk about a different organ that is indirectly connected to the brain. Let's talk about uremic encephalopathy. In this um, graphic here, we see a dialysis machine, either something that deals with hemodialysis or apheresis, which is tied to uremic function. Uremic is ureters or urinary system, which is the kidneys. And so the definition of uremic encephalopathy is cerebral dysfunction caused by the accumulation of toxins due to renal failure. Again, take this and kind of apply the same, it's the same mechanism of injury, but it's from a different source. Hepatic is from the liver, uremic is from the kidneys. You do have two kidneys most of the time. However, if your kidneys are not working, they can lead to toxins not exiting the body and thus building up in your bloodstream. Thus, the toxins would be carried by your blood to your brain. And so that's why it's important to consider the body as a whole. What we'll usually see are the same kind of cognitive and motor symptoms. And it's usually seen with a very slow mental decline. I was reading in this that yes, it is slow mental decline. It could be in part a dementia type. However, um, it's tied with drowsiness, loss of concentration, disorientation, and seizures. And where there are seizures, there is usually brain injury. Where there is smoke, where there is fire. And so, what we see with this disease process, really, or this mechanism of brain injury, is that another part of the filter and exit flow system is not working. And so, the poisons and the toxins get stored up and they continue to poison the body. There are treatments for this, and it's usually dialysis for late stage because dialysis is very invasive. It requires machines. It requires you to go in almost every other day, 3 times a week or so, twice a week, depending on how severe your kidney dysfunction is. And it also involves calcium and phosphate regulation. And so this kind of talks about body chemistry, where the body requires a bunch of balances, like we've talked about in blood sugar and like we've talked about with sodium levels. Same thing goes with fluid levels, and the kidneys and the liver both play a very important role. And when we think brain injury, we tend to think a blow on the head. However, we should also include a metabolic process. This is a type of metabolic encephalopathy. But let's continue. Let's talk about another kind of encephalopathy. This one is specifically called Wernicke's encephalopathy. Now, you might be saying, Jay, you've already talked about Wernicke's area in the brain. And yes, Wernicke's area in the brain in the temporal lobe is very, very important. However, that is attributed to the same scientist who, in that section of anatomy, he was given the name for that piece of that area of the brain. However, he also discovered something called Wernicke's encephalopathy, which is tied to this thing called beriberi, and which is linked to very low B1, vitamin B1 specifically. Again, you'll see that listed as thiamine. That is one of the uh, vitamins that you need in your body, vitamin deficiency or B1 deficiency in the brain specific. And what we usually see is nystagmus, ataxia, and confusion. Now, if you're wondering what those words mean, I will say this. Usually it ties in with mental, cognitive, physical effects. But if you ever read a medical document and they say something like ataxic gait, it's usually a sign that that's not a very good thing. Confusion being another one. And again, this is seen from a version of beriberi in the brain. We usually see that with malnutrition. So people who are maybe not getting enough vitamins and nutrients and minerals, maybe they're not eating healthy, or maybe they're not getting enough of anything in their body. So we see that commonly with malnutrition, but we also see beriberi with severe alcohol abuse. And so one might think, well, why Jay? Why is it alcohol abuse as well? Well, if you're constantly urinating the alcohol out and the alcohol is poisoning you, it might take some of the B1 with urination out. But um, we see it either from not enough B1 coming in or losing the B1 going out. But then again, this is also easily treated with vitamin B1. However, if left untreated, can be fatal. It kind of talks about, it reminds me of that conversation we had a while back about mosquito-borne brain injury and how that can be treated. Hard to identify, but can be fatal. However, it's rare. Same thing with Wernicke's encephalopathy. It can be rare, however, it can be fatal. So, um, this is another type of encephalopathy. Instead of it being from the liver or the kidneys, this is actually really from the stomach. And so, if you're not intaking enough B1, this might be one of those side effects. But let's continue. Let's move on. Let's talk about heavy metal encephalopathy. This is really a type of skin problem, really, skin or inhalation for heavy metals. What is heavy metals? We are talking about arsenic, cadmium, mercury, lead, and aluminum, um, all of which are in the natural world. However, or maybe the world that we're in, as we can see that those are common substances. However, in inappropriate or excess amounts, it leads to toxicity. So this can be caused by multiple ways. So this is inhalation or ingestion of these heavy metal toxins in unsafe amounts. It can cause the encephalopathy. Um, it's usually seen in fields like manufacturing, farming, and sewage. Again, those are all very necessary and needed jobs. I respect the people who do so. It would also be good to be aware of the things that surround. So, for example, if you're in manufacturing, you're probably going to be around a lot of metal shavings or metal dust. Same thing with farming, you're going to be around harmful, sometimes harmful chemicals. And same thing with sewage. That way you can treat them and do the job. But it's also found in other environmental and occupational hazards. Again, we talk about hazards, and this is just one of those things where it's like, yes, we need to be aware of this. We need to be aware of encephalopathy and toxic metal exposure. Usually, they are a separate diagnosis that can be linked together. And so we see this also with arsenic, copper, cobalt, chromium, lead, nickel, mercury, and many others. Pick up an average everyday object that has metal in it. It might have one of those in it. Um, so when we think about this, how do we prevent this? Well, we try to be safe around things, right? Especially if you're in those kinds of occupations that are going to be around these things. And so that's why OSHA is a really important thing. Um, Although pain in the neck sometimes, yes, but you want to be safe at your workplace. You want to be wearing the proper equipment, especially when you are in danger of inhaling or ingesting unsafe amounts of heavy metal toxins. So what does this lead me to conclude? Well, there's multiple types of encephalopathy. It covers a wide range of different kinds of brain injury, and it also covers a wide range of causes of brain injury. As we discussed, kidneys, liver, digestive system. Also, we talked about inhalation or maybe ingestion of that heavy metals, and they're all different ways that you can get encephalopathy. And so when we are discussing brain injury, context is really key. Not only does it provide a wide range, we need to be more specific on the various types of encephalopathy. We need to be more specific. We can't just say encephalopathy. It doesn't really tell me what happened in the brain injury. And so if they're able to clarify, well, it was a metabolic encephalopathy. I'm like, okay, what kind of metabolic encephalopathy? What caused it? It was a hypoglycemic encephalopathy. It was a Wernicke's encephalopathy. It was being more specific helps not only the person who, is a client on the caseload, but it also helps case managers help work around that. And it also helps clinicians to be very specific about these things. Again, that's why medical language is the way it is so you can be specific. So instead of just saying brain damage, you can say Wernicke's encephalopathy because of a beriberi condition or a B1 deficiency in the brain. And so being able to identify and address these dangers does help, and also the diagnosis as well. This also points me to one of my favorite things I like to talk about is preparation and prevention. If you're going to be in an environment where you know that either you're at risk of this, like heavy metals, wear the appropriate safety equipment that will protect you from being around too many of these heavy metals. Same thing goes if you start showing signs of something, maybe get it addressed. You want to address your kidneys and liver too. You don't want to forget that. And as a brain injury case manager, we tend to focus in on brains. We should also be able to examine the other parts that help contribute to or cause brain injury. So it's not necessarily just about the brain. We need to care about the body as a whole, just like we care about the person as a whole in our person-centeredness. But like always, here are my references. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. I'd appreciate your feedback in the form of a like, a comment, of subscription. Feel free to drop a comment down below whether maybe there's another form of obscure encephalopathy. I'd love to read about it. But with that being said, Have a wonderful day. Don't forget, protect your brains.